Christopher Gregor's anger and inability to cope with the challenges of fatherhood led to the tragic death of his 6-year-old son, Cory Mitchillo. Throughout the trial, evidence painted a disturbing picture of a father who repeatedly took out his frustrations on his defenseless child, ultimately inflicting fatal injuries in a fit of rage. The prosecution argued that Christopher's deep-seated resentment towards Cory's mother, Brianna Mitchillo, and his own inadequacies as a parent fueled his violent behavior. Text messages revealed Christopher's anger when Brianna dropped Cory off later than expected, leading him to punish the child by forcing him to run on a treadmill, an incident captured on video and played for the jury. This cruel and unwarranted punishment foreshadowed the tragic events that would unfold just weeks later when Christopher's anger reached a boiling point, and he inflicted the blunt force trauma that claimed Cory's life. As the trial unfolded, it became clear that Christopher prioritized his own selfish desires over his son's well-being, engaging in casual conversations with a woman he met online while Cory lay dying. The jury ultimately found Christopher guilty of endangering the welfare of a child and aggravated manslaughter, holding him accountable for the irreparable harm he inflicted upon his son. Cory's death serves as a heartbreaking reminder of the devastating consequences when a parent allows their own emotions to overshadow their responsibility to protect and nurture their child. Brianna Mitchillo, a 17-year-old girl living in New Jersey, gives birth to a baby boy named Cory on May 1, 2014. Brianna, who lives with her mother, Rebecca Mitchillo, and her siblings, faces the challenges of being a young single mother while trying to navigate her own life and responsibilities. Christopher Gregor, a young man with a passion for teaching, lives in Baltimore, Maryland, where he pursues his master's degree at the prestigious Johns Hopkins University. Employed by Urban Teachers, an organization dedicated to providing quality education in urban areas, Christopher finds fulfillment in his work. However, his life takes an unexpected turn when he learns that he is being sued for child support for a child he has never met or even knew existed. As Christopher fights the child support case, he eventually learns that he is indeed Cory's biological father. In a surprising turn of events, Christopher decides to embrace his newfound role as a father and chooses to be an active part of Cory's life. He moves back to New Jersey to live with his parents, David and Carolyn Gregor, in Monroe Township. The Gregor family welcomes Cory with open arms, determined to provide him with a loving and nurturing environment. Christopher, along with his parents, teaches Cory how to ride a bicycle, play soccer, baseball, and football. They share custody with the Mitchillos, ensuring that Cory has the opportunity to bond with both sides of his family. However, in March 2020, Brianna faces personal challenges that lead to her losing custody of Cory. Christopher is granted full parental custody, while Brianna is denied visitation rights. This change in circumstances creates tension between the Mitchillo and Gregor families as they navigate the complex dynamics of co-parenting. As time passes, Brianna works on overcoming her challenges, and with the help of the Gregor family, she slowly regains visitation rights. The two families attempt to put aside their differences for the sake of Cory's well-being, but the underlying tension remains. In March 2021, Brianna picks up Cory for a scheduled visit and takes him to Pennsylvania to celebrate her father's birthday. Despite the plans to return Cory to Christopher by 3 o'clock or 4 p.m., Brianna and Cory end up running late due to traffic. Brianna informs Christopher of the delay, but her tardiness infuriates him. Christopher, frustrated by the situation, instructs Brianna to drop Cory off at the apartment complex's gym, where he will meet them. Brianna complies, and Christopher takes Cory into the gym. Unbeknownst to them, the gym surveillance system captures their interactions, revealing a disturbing incident that will later come to light. In the following weeks, Cory's teacher notices bruises on his body, raising concerns about potential abuse. Brianna, also worried about Cory's well-being, takes steps to protect her son by filing an emergency application with the court to gain custody. Meanwhile, Christopher maintains his innocence, insisting that the bruises are the result of normal childhood activities like playing football. As the situation escalates, Brianna takes Cory to multiple hospitals and pediatricians, seeking answers and support. The medical professionals express concerns about the bruises and recommend further evaluation. Amidst the growing tension and accusations, a tragic event occurs that forever changes the lives of everyone involved, setting the stage for a complex legal battle and a search for the truth behind Cory's untimely death. On April 2, 2021, a tragic event unfolds that forever changes the lives of Cory, his family, and those close to him. Cory, despite the bruises, appears to be in good spirits, walking and talking normally as he enters Christopher's home. However, just hours later, at approximately 3:48 p.m., Christopher rushes Cory's nearly lifeless body into Southern Ocean Medical Center. He informs the medical staff that Cory has been sleepy and lethargic. The hospital quickly admits Cory and begins emergency treatment. But despite their best efforts, Cory's condition deteriorates rapidly. He experiences seizures and goes into cardiac arrest, requiring intubation and resuscitation attempts. Tragically, at 5:03 p.m., Cory is pronounced dead, leaving his family and loved ones devastated and searching for answers. In the aftermath of Cory's death, Christopher's actions raised suspicions. Shortly after Cory's passing, Christopher leaves the hospital abruptly, getting into his car and driving away, leaving behind the hospital staff and his deceased son. Law enforcement launches an investigation into Cory's death, working diligently to gather evidence and piece together the events leading up to the tragic incident. As part of their investigation, they discover that Christopher fled the state, making his way to Tennessee. On April 4, 2021, just 2 days after Cory's death, authorities locate Christopher in Tennessee and take him into custody. As the investigation continues, a forensic pathologist reviews Cory's autopsy report and medical records, shedding light on the extent of the injuries the young boy sustained. The pathologist determines that Cory, a once healthy 6-year-old, died as a result of blunt force trauma. The report details contusions on Cory's body in various stages of healing, indicating a pattern of abuse. Additionally, the pathologist notes acute inflammatory responses throughout Cory's body and lacerations to his heart and liver. Based on the evidence gathered during the investigation, including the medical findings and witness statements, prosecutors charge Christopher with 2 serious offenses. The first charge is endangering the welfare of a child, stemming from the incident on March 20th, 2021, where surveillance footage captures Christopher's rough treatment of Cory in the apartment complex gym. The second and more severe charge is murder related to the events that transpired on April 2, 2021, leading to Cory's tragic death. As the case against Christopher unfolds, digital forensic experts analyze his cell phone data, uncovering a disturbing pattern of behavior on the day of Cory's death. Records show that Christopher was texting a female associate, making plans for that evening, just hours before Cory's condition deteriorated. Investigators also discover a selfie Christopher took with Cory on the couch, a mere 3 hours before the young boy's untimely passing. The digital evidence paints a picture of Christopher's state of mind and priorities on that fateful day. Investigators find that he ordered food through a delivery service and conducted online searches related to loss of consciousness, sleepiness, and nausea, all while Cory's health was rapidly declining. We now fast forward to the trial, where Christopher stands accused of endangering the welfare of a child and murder in connection with the tragic death of his 6-year-old son, Cory. Central to the prosecution's case is the surveillance footage from the apartment complex gym on March 20th, 2021, arguing that it demonstrates Christopher's pattern of abuse and neglect towards Cory. By highlighting the disturbing images of Christopher repeatedly forcing Cory onto the treadmill, the prosecution seeks to establish a history of mistreatment that ultimately culminated in the young boy's death. To bolster their case, the prosecution calls upon a forensic pathologist to testify about the extent and nature of Cory's injuries. Through the expert's testimony, the prosecution aims to paint a vivid picture of the suffering Cory endured, emphasizing the multiple contusions in various stages of healing and the acute inflammatory response throughout his body. The prosecution argues that these injuries are inconsistent with normal childhood accidents and instead point to a pattern of ongoing abuse. Furthermore, the prosecution delves into Christopher's digital footprint, presenting evidence from his cell phone to establish his state of mind and actions on the day of Cory's death. The prosecution highlights the text messages Christopher exchanged with a female associate, making plans for the evening, as well as the selfie he took with Cory just hours before the child's condition deteriorated. The prosecution contends that these actions demonstrate Christopher's lack of concern for his son's well-being and his prioritization of personal pursuits over Cory's care. To tie the evidence together, the prosecution calls upon witnesses who can speak to Christopher's behavior and demeanor before, during, and after Cory's death.
Now, a forensic pathologist that reviewed Cory's autopsy and his medical records is going to testify. He's a doctor. And he will tell you that Cory was a once healthy 6-year-old boy that died from blunt force trauma. He will describe for you the contusions on Cory's body all over in different stages of healing. He will tell you that the inflammatory response throughout Cory's body was acute. is going to describe that Cory's heart and liver were both lacerated. Now, what you won't hear is that Cory was struck with a bat, stomped on by the defendant. You're not going to hear that. Because the only people there in that apartment were the defendant and Cory. But what you will hear is that the only people that were in that apartment were the defendant and Cory. And that the serious bodily injury that Cory sustained while with the defendant, and only the defendant, were so catastrophic that they ended his life. Now, there are two charges in this case. The first, endangering the welfare of a child, and the second, murder. The state must prove both beyond a reasonable doubt. That means you're firmly convinced, and that's a burden the state embraces. That first count, endangering the welfare of a child, is for what this defendant did to Cory in the gym on May 20th, 2021. And that second count is for what this defendant did to Cory on April 2nd, 2021. That's the murder. In order to prove a murder, the state has to demonstrate that a defendant acted purposely or knowingly. But rarely is there a person that can come into court and tell you what someone was thinking when they engaged in a particular act. So how do we prove that to you? We have to look at all the things the defendant was doing before, during, and after those crimes. Now, an expert in digital forensics will testify, and he'll tell you that he examined the defendant's cell phone. And from the defendant's cell phone, he was able to learn that throughout the day on April 2nd, 2021, the defendant was texting with a female associate, making plans for that night. On that same date, 3 hours before Cory died, he took a selfie with Cory on the couch. He also ordered McDonald's during that afternoon, and he did a search on his phone for loss of consciousness, sleepy, and nauseous. You're going to have information before you, and I'd ask you to consider it, about what this defendant was doing all day, at home, at the hospital, after he left. What he was saying to the people at the hospital, to Cory's mom, and everyone else. His texts, his phone calls, his web searches, his selfie, even his garbage. I'm going to ask that you pay attention to all of that. And when you do that, please pay attention to what's happening to Cory that day, that afternoon. On April 2nd, 2021, when Cory was brought back to his father, he vomited. He defecated in his pants, and his body was slowly shutting down. Consider what the defendant's doing while you consider what's happening to Cory.
Next is the defense's turn to present their case. The defense argues that the prosecution's case is largely circumstantial and lacks conclusive evidence directly linking Christopher to Cory's death. The defense begins by focusing on Cory's medical history and the events leading up to his hospitalization. They argue that Cory's symptoms, including lethargy, vomiting, and leg pain, are consistent with sepsis, a life-threatening condition caused by the body's response to infection. The defense suggests that Cory may have been suffering from an underlying illness, such as pneumonia, which ultimately led to his rapid deterioration and death, suggesting that the bruising and inflammation could be attributed to the aggressive life-saving measures undertaken by medical professionals during Cory's final hours. The defense aims to create reasonable doubt by offering a plausible alternative explanation for the physical evidence. Throughout the trial, the defense also attempts to humanize Christopher, portraying him as a loving father who was actively involved in Cory's life. They highlight Christopher's efforts to gain custody, his engagement in Cory's extracurricular activities, and his genuine concern for his son's well-being. By presenting a more sympathetic image of Christopher, the defense hopes to counter the prosecution's characterization of him as an abusive and neglectful parent.
You're going to see that on March 20th, Christopher takes that young boy into a gym that's part of his residential complex. And in that gym, you see him put Cory on the treadmill, and he begins to work out while he's watching him from across the room. At some point, you're going to see Christopher go over to that treadmill and speed it up. And you're going to see Cory fall. And you're going to see him pick that boy up 6 times. And 6 times put him back on the treadmill. And I'm going to tell you right now, you're not going to like him. And I don't care if you like him. When you see that video, you're going to be horrified. You're going to be mortified. But I'm telling you right now that the evidence you're going to see of Cory's death had absolutely nothing to do with that treadmill. As a matter of fact, the treadmill incident was on March 20th. And between March 20th and April 2nd, Cory spent a significant amount of time with Brianna, spent a significant amount of time with Christopher, and actually tried out for a flag football team here in Ocean County, and did so well in the tryout that the coach actually had discussions with Christopher to raise him up a level. You will hear that Brianna became suspicious of some bruises. Bruises to his chest, bruises to his arms. And I submit to you, those bruises did occur from a treadmill. They occurred from football. They occurred from boys being boys. You'll hear testimony that on a regular basis, Christopher would take him to a field across the street and play football with him like any other dad, that he practiced with him for this tryout. You hear testimony that Christopher himself was actually an athlete who competed in football. That when he was at Jersey Shore Medical Center, they found that he had a possibility of something called sepsis, which you'll understand from a doctor. I'm not a doctor, I'm a lawyer. But doctors are going to testify here. And you're going to understand that sepsis is your body's reaction to an infection. And it's a rapid response to that infection. And that rapid response, you're going to hear from doctors, will tell you, can show a child is loopy, disoriented, nauseous.
The prosecution's first witness is Brianna Mitchillo, Cory's mother. She offers a first-hand account of the events surrounding Cory's life and tragic death. Her testimony is crucial as it provides insight into the family dynamics, the custody arrangement between her and Christopher, and her growing concerns about Cory's well-being in the months leading up to his death. Brianna begins by describing her relationship with Christopher and the circumstances that led to their shared custody arrangement. She explains how Christopher came into Cory's life when the boy was just 4 years old, after a paternity test confirmed his biological connection. Brianna recounts the challenges she faced as a young mother, including her struggle with substance abuse. She openly admits to her past mistakes, but emphasizes her deep love for Cory and her determination to be a better parent. Brianna describes the joint custody agreement that was put in place, with Christopher being granted primary physical custody while she had visitation rights. As Brianna's testimony delves into the months leading up to Cory's death, she expresses her growing concerns about her son's well-being. She recounts noticing bruises on Cory's body during her visitations and questioning their origin. Brianna describes her efforts to seek medical attention for Cory, taking him to pediatricians and hospitals in an attempt to uncover the cause of his injuries. Brianna's testimony takes an emotional turn as she recounts the events of April 1st and 2nd, 2021. She describes picking Cory up for her scheduled visitation and taking him to the hospital for a child abuse examination. Brianna explains how she learned about the court's denial of her emergency custody application and the order for a follow-up examination within 7 days. Fighting back tears, Brianna recounts the last moments she shared with Cory in the car outside Christopher's apartment complex. She describes her son as talking, walking, and seemingly in good spirits, despite the visible bruises on his body. Brianna expresses her regret for not taking more decisive action to protect Cory and her feelings of helplessness in the face of the court's decisions.
Now, is your son Cory no longer with us?
No. Well, yes.
And can you tell the jury the day he passed?
April 2nd, 2021.
And how old was Cory when he passed?
He was 6.
And what types of things did your son Cory like to do as a 6-year-old?
He liked reading, coloring, painting, playing outside.
And what type of demeanor did Cory have as a 6-year-old?
He was happy, silly, loving.
Now, Brianna, can you tell the jurors who's depicted in that picture?
My son Cory,
And how old was he in that picture?
6.
And who took that picture?
I did.
And can you tell the jurors what you were doing when you took that picture of Cory?
We were at the park playing in the snow.
Okay.
The prosecution would next play the treadmill video during Brianna's testimony.
Brianna, who is the child located in that video?
That's Cory.
And how old was Cory in that video?
He was 6.
And who was the adult male located in that video?
The defendant.
And again, you're familiar with that area.
Yes.
Now, when was the first time that you ever saw that video?
A few weeks ago.
And have you ever had possession of that video?
No.
Brianna, what is the next time that you heard from the defendant on April 2nd of 2021?
Around 3:30.
And did you speak to the defendant on the telephone?
Yes.
And at 3:30 on April 2nd, what did the defendant tell you about Cory?
He said he was lethargic. His legs were hurting. He was sleeping all day, and he was throwing up and just didn't feel good. And then he told me to send Cory's insurance card to him.
And did you send the defendant Cory's insurance card?
I did.
And did the defendant say anything about taking Cory to the hospital?
Yes.
And did the defendant tell you what hospital he was taking Cory to?
No. I started calling the hospitals to see if Cory was there. I also called my local police department to kind of report Cory as like I don't know where he is, and he's not feeling good. He's sick.
And about 6 o'clock that day on the 2nd, did the police come to your home?
Yes.
And did you learn at that time that Cory had passed?
I did.
Next, Dr. Nancy Deacon takes the stand as a key witness for the prosecution. As a pediatrician who examined Cory just one day before his tragic death, her testimony holds significant weight in establishing the extent and nature of the alleged abuse suffered by the young boy. Nancy describes the emergency visit, which was prompted by concerns of abuse. She recounts her conversation with Cory, during which he initially hesitates to disclose the cause of his injuries. Nancy emphasizes that she assured Cory of his safety and the importance of honesty in order for her to help him. According to Nancy, Cory eventually reveals that he sustained bruises on his chest, arm, and hip, as well as a forehead abrasion, while playing football with his father. He further discloses that he acquired additional bruises from falling on a treadmill, stating that his father forced him to run because he was too fat. Using a body chart, Nancy methodically documents and describes the 14 distinct bruises, abrasions, and marks she observes on Cory's body. She explains the varying colors of the bruises, ranging from pink to yellow-green, and how they indicate different stages of healing. Nancy also points out that some of the bruises are located on soft tissue areas, which typically require more force to cause injury compared to bony prominences.
And so I explained to him that in order to help him, I had to know how he got hurt and what happened. And still he hesitated, so I said, Cory, we can't help you if we don't know what happened, and please, and don't worry, because you know, I need to know so I can help you be safe.
And did Cory give you any response?
And so he looked at his mom, and she said,
You can't tell me what anybody else
okay.
said. But did Cory give you a response?
He did. He said that he got the chest and arm and hip bruises and the forehead scrape when he was playing football outside on turf. And he said that his dad was teaching him how to catch a football. And when I pressed him further, you know, that's a lot from playing football. He said he got more bruises when he fell from a treadmill. Cory says that he got the chest, arm, and hip bruises and forehead abrasion when he was playing football outside on turf. He said that his dad was teaching him how to catch a football. When I pressed him further, he said he got more bruises when he fell from a treadmill. He said that he had to run fast because his father said he was too fat.
The next witness is Lindsay Carnevale, a registered nurse at Southern Ocean Medical Center, who treated Cory in the ER when Christopher Gregor brought him in on April 2, 2021. Lindsay begins by describing the triage process when Cory arrives at the Southern Ocean Medical Center emergency room. She notes that Cory appeared very lethargic and pale, showing signs of being extremely ill. Lindsay also observes bruising on Cory's body, particularly on his chest, chin, and left temple. As Lindsay and the medical staff ask Christopher about Cory's medical history, Christopher attributes the bruising to Cory playing football and riding his bicycle. He also mentions that Cory's mother, Brianna, is a drug addict. Christopher expresses that he does not want Brianna to be contacted about Cory's condition. When asked about Cory's symptoms prior to being brought to the ER, Christopher states that Cory had been vomiting and complaining of leg and body pain. Throughout Lindsay's interactions with Christopher, she notes his lack of emotion and seemingly emotionless demeanor, which stands out to her given the gravity of the situation. As Cory's condition rapidly deteriorates, the medical team initiates pediatric CPR and intubates him in an attempt to save his life. Lindsay describes the efforts to revive Cory, including attempting to take him for a CT scan. However, Cory's condition is too unstable, and they are forced to bring him back to the emergency room. Despite the medical staff's best efforts, Cory's heart stops, and he is tragically pronounced dead at 5:03 p.m. During her testimony, Lindsay emphasizes that there were no signs of bleeding or gastrointestinal issues while Cory was in the hospital. This information is crucial in establishing the cause of Cory's death and ruling out potential alternative explanations. Lindsay's testimony also highlights Christopher's behavior. She recounts how Christopher briefly enters the room where Cory is being treated, but then leaves abruptly. Christopher does not return to the room, leaving Cory in the care of the medical staff as they desperately try to save his life.
And what was Cory's condition?
Cory was very sick. He mumbled a couple words to me. He seized.
Can you tell the jurors what happened regarding Cory's treatment at the emergency room and his condition?
Cory seized, and then his heart stopped. He had stopped breathing. So we initiated CPR. Dr. Pachati intubated him, where he put a tube in his trachea and into his lungs, and ventilation was provided along with CPR.
And what type of CPR was administered?
Pediatric CPR.
And why was pediatric CPR
Because he was
administered?
a 6-year-old little boy.
And what is pediatric CPR?
It's one hand on the chest.
Was Cory taken for a CT scan?
He was. At one point, we had regained pulses, and we attempted to bring him down a CAT scan. And when we had gotten a CAT scan, he lost pulses again, and we were unable to do it and had to bring him back.
So after that, what room was Cory brought back to?
Room 6.
Did the defendant then return to the area of room 6?
He did.
And were you present inside of room 6 at the time?
I was.
And what medical staff was present in room 6 at this point?
Dr. Pachati, there was some techs and other team members.
Did Dr. Pachati exit the room?
He did.
And what was happening with Cory's condition at this time?
Cory was not breathing. His heart was not beating. He was basically dead at that point.
Did the defendant then re-enter the room at Soch?
No.
At approximately 4:51, did the defendant re-enter the room at Soch?
He did at that point, yes.
And were you present at that point inside of room 6 with Cory?
Yes, I was.
And what was Cory's condition at that time?
His heart was not beating and he was not breathing.
Did the defendant exit room 6?
He did.
And did the defendant then ever come back to room 6 again?
No, he did not.
And who stayed with Cory?
We did. We were the only ones with him.
What time was Cory pronounced?
5:03 p.m.
And were you present in the room?
I was.
Afterwards, Dr. Thomas Andrew takes the stand as an expert witness for the prosecution. He is a forensic pathologist with extensive experience in child abuse cases. His role is to provide an expert opinion on the cause and manner of death. In Cory's case, he determines the cause to be blunt impact injuries to the chest and abdomen. Thomas defines blunt force trauma and its effects on the body, ranging from minor bruises to life-threatening internal injuries. Regarding manner of death, Thomas concludes that Cory's death was a homicide, meaning it was caused by the actions of another person. He bases this opinion on the pattern and distribution of the injuries, which he believes could not have been self-inflicted or accidental. Thomas also notes the presence of acute inflammation in the heart and liver injuries. Thomas also addresses the defense's theory of sepsis, stating that he found no evidence of sepsis or any infectious process in the autopsy. He disagrees with the interpretation of the post-mortem CT scan showing lung disease, arguing that those findings are more consistent with the effects of death and the documented lung contusion.
You have an opinion after you reviewed all of this material in regard to the decedent's cause of death.
Yes.
And can you tell the jurors what that opinion is?
I'm simply going to quote from my report because it's a mouthful, and we'll break it down. But Cory died of blunt impact injuries of the chest and abdomen with laceration of the heart, left pulmonary contusion, and laceration and contusion of the liver. Cory's manner of death is homicide. While there are many, many, many causes of death, typically in forensic pathology, there are only 5 manners of death. And manner of death is simply a one-word description to explain how a death came about. And those 5 are natural, accident, suicide, homicide, or in rare instances, undetermined. In Cory's case, in that these injuries could not have been inflicted by himself with any kind of intent, it's certainly not suicide. These injuries, given their pattern and distribution, are consistent with having been inflicted by another person. Therefore, any death that is related to the actions of another person is, from a medical examiner's standpoint, from an epidemiological or public health standpoint, homicide. Now, it doesn't have any legal significance, but that's the way that a medical examiner certifies it. So Cory's death was at the hands of another person, therefore it is a homicide.
Did you make any findings regarding sepsis or infection?
Once again, that issue came up on the initial examination. And based not only on the autopsy findings, but my review of the medical records, there's zero, not one scintilla of evidence of sepsis or any other infectious process in Cory's autopsy.
Despite his arguments that Cory died of natural causes like pneumonia or sepsis rather than physical abuse, and that the injuries found were caused by CPR efforts, Christopher Gregor was found guilty of endangering the welfare of a child and aggravated manslaughter. While the jury did not convict him of murder, they determined that Christopher had recklessly caused Cory's death under circumstances manifesting extreme indifference to human life. The guilty verdicts indicate the jury was persuaded by the prosecution's evidence that Christopher had abused Cory and inflicted the fatal blunt force trauma injuries. The tragic death of 6-year-old Cory Mitchillo raises the question of what factors may have contributed to this devastating crime. While the complexities of human behavior make it challenging to pinpoint a single cause, the evidence presented in the trial suggests that Christopher's anger and frustration towards Cory's mother, combined with his inability to cope with the responsibilities of fatherhood, played a significant role in the events leading to Cory's death. Throughout the trial, multiple instances of Christopher's animosity towards Brianna Mitchillo, Cory's mother, were brought to light. Text messages revealed that Christopher was deeply upset when Brianna dropped Cory off late on March 20th, 2021. Leading him to punish the child by forcing him to run on a treadmill. This incident, captured on video, demonstrated Christopher's willingness to take out his anger towards Brianna on their son. The prosecution argued that this pattern of behavior was evident again on April 2nd, 2021, when Brianna brought Cory home later than expected after taking him to the hospital the previous night. Christopher's resentment towards Brianna appeared to stem from their tumultuous relationship and custody arrangements. Evidence suggested that Christopher felt Brianna was an unfit mother due to her alleged drug use, and that he was seeking full custody of Cory. However, instead of focusing on providing a stable and loving environment for his son, Christopher allowed his frustration with Brianna to manifest in the form of physical punishment and, ultimately, fatal abuse. Moreover, Christopher's apparent inability to cope with the challenges of being a primary caregiver may have exacerbated his frustration and anger. As a father who had not been consistently present in Cory's life until recently, Christopher likely struggled with the demands of single parenthood. The responsibility of caring for a young child, especially one with whom he had not yet built a strong bond, could have overwhelmed Christopher, leading him to lash out in moments of stress. The prosecution also highlighted Christopher's lack of concern for Cory's well-being in the hours leading up to his death. Despite Cory's visible distress and deteriorating condition, Christopher chose to engage in casual conversations with a woman he had met online, discussing plans to meet up and order pizza. This behavior suggests that Christopher prioritized his own desires over his son's urgent medical needs, displaying a disturbing lack of empathy and parental responsibility. Furthermore, Christopher's actions in the aftermath of Cory's death indicate a consciousness of guilt and a desire to evade accountability. His decision to flee the state, combined with his internet searches related to deleting text messages and avoiding phone tracking, paint a picture of a man who knew he had done something wrong and was attempting to cover his tracks. This behavior is inconsistent with that of a grieving father who had lost his child to natural causes. It is important to note that while Christopher's anger towards Brianna and his inability to cope with fatherhood may have contributed to his actions, they do not excuse the abuse and neglect that led to Cory's death. As a parent, Christopher had a fundamental duty to protect and care for his child, regardless of his personal challenges or frustrations. His failure to do so and the tragic consequences of his actions demonstrate the devastating impact of child abuse and the importance of holding perpetrators accountable. Do you think Christopher's anger towards Brianna was the primary factor that led to his abusive behavior towards Cory? What are your thoughts on Gregory's behavior in the aftermath of Cory's death, such as fleeing the state and attempting to cover his tracks? Please remember to subscribe to the channel to receive automatic reminders of all of our future videos. Also, if you want early access to ad-free and uncensored versions of all Wicked videos, feel free to become a channel member. Becoming a member will also give you access to exclusive emotes and badges, which you can flex in the comments and during our live streams. Thank you for watching, and join us next time when we explore the psychological maze of some of the most wicked people.